other developments today from the Special Investigating Unit. Breaking news, you would have seen this. That's the numbers coming out of the SIU report into COVID-19 spending by government departments are incredibly disturbing. It's referring 386 cases to the NPA. In other words, it believes that there are that many cases where there might have been criminality. It wants 224 people to be disciplined by government departments. The money is, of course, something else. 45 cases involving 2.1 billion rand are going to the special tribunal to try and get the money back. Kaizer Kganyago, he's been very patient with us this afternoon. He's the spokesperson for the SIU. He joins us. Kaizer, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time and for your patience. You've done a lot of work here. Have you been surprised by the sheer scale of this? You want nearly 400 cases to go to the NPA.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you to your viewers. It is the work that we have been doing for the past 18 months. We started by being surprised at the beginning, but towards the middle and to the end, it was not surprising anymore because we were able to see the patterns of what was going on, and we were able to follow the money, and we ended up with the results that you are seeing now.
How strong is the evidence in these cases? You want nearly 400 of these cases to go to the NPA. You must believe there's a strong case.
No, definitely. The law or the Act, the SIU Act, is very clear that when you do your investigations, where you find criminality, you must be in a position to then give that evidence to the NPA. And we are very clear that there is criminality that has happened in all the 386 cases that we are talking about. And we are already in discussions with the prosecution. As we speak now, we know that the prosecution has been given, has allocated prosecutors for these cases, and we are dealing with them as we're working with them, and we'll follow it up even after the report has been given to the president.
I mean, you're at the special tribunal, over 2 billion rand. That's a lot of money if you get it all back.
No, definitely. We're trying to get all of that money back. This is the 45 cases that were before that, and people will remember. These are cases, for example, like Digital Vibes, where in Digital Vibes, for example, alone we need about 150 million rand. We've got the case here that involves the South African Health Laboratory Services, where we need to recover about over 176 million rand. And we've got the Caledon case, the one that the fence in Beitbridge. The matter is also before the tribunal. And we need to recover, but we're hopeful that we'll recover most of the money because we've got a strong case to show that all those contracts were entered into in an unlawful manner.
Is there a particular period when all of this happened? So, I mean, I'm presuming, tell me if I get this right, Kaizer, that this was sort of at the start of that pandemic, that period perhaps from March to July, August 2020. Would that be right?
Not necessarily that time, because there were people who continued to do other things even after when they knew that we had started investigating, because I think people never thought that anybody will come looking, because at that time there was an excitement around the issues that says it's an emergency, we need to just make sure that we do things, we're not going to follow procurement processes. But the majority of it would have happened at that time, at the beginning of the pandemic.
I mean, the reason I ask that is, if I remember correctly, this is the time when the normal Treasury procurement regulations were actually suspended, because the Treasury has a way in which provinces are supposed to do things, otherwise they don't get the money. In this case, some of those regulations were suspended. So was this what happened? People sort of took advantage of that? Is that the sort of working thesis, that many of these cases, some of these cases at least, were people taking advantage of the relaxation of the Treasury regulations?
No, definitely. They took advantage of that, but they went beyond it, because even when there's an emergency, then there's a relaxation. There are still rules that need to be followed. And therefore, some of the instances, you remember we had this discussion, me and you, on this platform some time back, when we were talking about the issue of the Department of Education, where people were just sending SMSs, and then they were given contract without following any process. And those are the things that I say they went beyond what they were supposed to do. And it was laissez-faire. Look at the example of this hospital that was, they were refurbished in the Anglo-Ashanti in Carltonville, where the budget for the refurbishment was 50 million rand, but it ended up being 500 million rand, and only about 8 people ever slept in that hospital after it was renovated. Therefore, those are the kind of things that we're talking about.
One of the most incredible stories coming out of the pandemic actually all seems to center around Gauteng for some reason. Just so that I understand this in my brain, Kaizer, this is generally speaking, this is provinces who spent this money, right? It was contracts, I mean, in the education case, again in Gauteng, the WhatsApp contracts were signed. Is this provincial departments who spent this money?
Yes, in the main it is. The whole total of the investigation amount that we're investigating was 14 billion rand. And of that 14 billion, Gauteng alone spent 6 billion rand, which is a lot of money. 6 billion rand of 14 billion rand. Almost half of it was spent in Gauteng alone. And then the second biggest that spend will be Eastern Cape. They spent almost 3 billion. Therefore, between Gauteng and Eastern Cape, they spent together about 9 billion rand of this amount. And then we've got national departments that would have spent just over 2 billion. Therefore, the three of them amounts to 12 billion, almost 11 billion of the 14 billion rand that was spent.
I don't know how far your recommendations can go. So, I mean, some of the recommendations are pretty obvious. The Treasury should never relax its regulations again. I imagine you can make that recommendation. Are you able to recommend that people who made the decisions but aren't themselves implicated in criminality, that there be investigations? Or are you able to recommend that the sort of procurement structures, the systems used by the provincial governments are changed? Are you able to actually go that far, or are you only able to follow the money and the legality?
No, we do go that far, Stephen. That is why if you look at the case that we did with Masuku in the beginning of the year last year, where we were basically saying, what was your judicial responsibility as an executive authority? What did you do and not do that necessitated that this kind of thing happened? It was not an issue of saying you are corrupt yourself, but you should have done certain things to protect the organization. And those are the things that we do. And in some instances, we went and said to the people at ACM and say, you are supposed to be the custodian of this. You did not do this. You are supposed to have done this. And we asked that they be disciplined. And you know that some of them were fired and some of them are still undergoing the disciplinary hearings.
Kaizer Kganyago, there's so much more work to do on all of this. I know that we're going to speak to you again. I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. Kaizer Kganyago, the spokesperson for the Special Investigating Unit, as I say, just so much work that needs to be done. Well, related to this, directly related to this last conversation, Transparency International, they have a corruption perceptions index. I'll tell you where South Africa has been